Well, first of all, a nice Italian boy like you, how did you get to a great title like Earl? I mean, like Count Basie, there's Duke Ellington. How did you become Earl Slick?
You want this? You want the real deal?
I want the real. I think we deserve.
You deserve the real deal.
We can't handle the truth. You can't handle. We can handle the truth. We want to know how you became Earl Slick.
I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in a.
Oh, you got a home crowd.
Always when you just gotta say Brooklyn, it's happening, man. In an immigrant Italian family that had the beginnings of the Brooklyn accent actually came a lot from Irish and Italian, and it all got mushed up and it turned into Brooklyn accent. And my grandmother had a way of saying things where R's and O's and things went in the wrong place. So olive oil was not olive oil, it was olive Earl. She would say, or burl an egg, I'm gonna burl an egg, right? So I picked this, I grew up with my grandmother for the most part as a kid. And I was in a band with a singer from down south. Like, he didn't have an accent, right? And he just thought it was very funny. So burl and oil and Earl, oil slick, Earl Slick, and that's how that, and
we were wondering.
That's what happened.
Oh, that's now we know that, because I thought Her Majesty the Queen had just anointed you or something like that.
I wish that I get one of those medals and things, right? And I get little red carpets when I go to.
That's right, and she takes a sword out.
And I heard you get free fish and chips as well when you're.
And the bad English teeth.
Oh well.
You don't want to go there.
No.
So, growing up in Brooklyn, what was the music you listened to as a kid? What was the first music you listened to?
My family was a lot of Italians. Every holiday there's a party of some sort. So Louis Prima. A lot of big bands from my dad, because he was a World War II vet, and that was the Glenn Miller days, so all that was being played. My mother loved country music, so I heard a lot of Hank Williams as a kid. I don't know how interested I was in it, to tell you the truth. It was just there, and I was conscious that the music was there. And early 60s, that period between when Elvis disappeared and the Beatles came, was the Annette Funicello and the Frankie Avalons and all that, and I wasn't making a whole lot of sense of any of that, right? So the influences came from me hearing music a lot. Right. So I guess I was interested in music. My grandmother loved Bobby Darin. So, and she had, I don't know how many times I heard Mac the Knife being played in that house, a million times. She would play it over and over again. So it was there. It was in my head. Like, consciously to tell you how interested I was at the time, I don't know. But the radio started playing the Beatles, and the British invasion was starting to happen. And, boy, that was Italian. Look at that.
No, prego, tell me more.
Hey.
So,
grazie.
What was the first wave of Beatles music or British invasion? What were the first things you remember hearing? Was this on the radio?
It was the radio. It was Please Please Me, I Want to Hold Your Hand. And it got my attention. But what really got my attention, as I said at another talk that we had earlier, was the Ed Sullivan Show. And I saw the excitement and the music. And growing up in the 50s, for anybody who's of the right age group in here, and I'm going to look because I know there's a few of you out there, it was a very right-wing, do what we say, fit in the way, wear your hair the way we say, dress like we say, do like we say, or you're an outcast. Well, these four guys get on TV with these tight suits on and these pointy boots on and these girly haircuts, as my dad used to call them. And all of a sudden I went, whoa. I added that. I added the music. I added the girls screaming. I went to school the next day, and everybody, what little hair they had was all being combed down. And it started. And then when I did get my guitar, I found that I really did love music. I really did. And I didn't, from the time I picked up my first guitar, I have never put it down.
Did you take lessons or did you teach yourself?
I took 4 lessons, and the guy, here, there you go, thank you. Is that better? All right. I was testing your ears. I took it was one a week for a month, and he had sheet music to read of silly little things like a little brown jug and stuff. I'm going, I want to play Beatles songs, and I quit. And I would sit in front of the television and in front of the record player. I learned the theme for the Twilight Zone, the theme from the Munsters, and whatever I could pick up off the Beatle records. And then I found out they had these things back then that were actually illegal called fake books. They were big, thick volumes of music, but not in notes. It just told you the chord, and it had a little box with dots on it that showed where your fingers went. So I would look at the thing, and I would listen to the records, and I taught myself. And then once I kind of got the lay of the land, I was able to actually, my ear was good enough to pick up without even looking at the music anymore. So I taught myself how to play.
Right. Now, of course, when you do that, early rock and roll, when you're hearing, 3 chords, 4 chords, 5 chords, and, not that complex, that's one thing. But as the Beatles got, music especially, got more complicated and more sophisticated, I mean, what happened when you encountered F sharp minor 7th, sustain the 4th? I mean, stuff like that. What did you do? I mean, that's hard to pick up.
You play the root note. So if it was a B minor dash 5, 7, 8, you just played the B part. And then there was always some guy in the neighborhood, though, that knew the chords. And I would find him. And I would go, how do you do that?
Now, at a certain point, you started playing with other musicians and the aspiration to be in a band. Tell me about that.
When it first, the first actual, what I would call a band, there was a kid around the corner that had a snare drum. And there was a kid that had a bass, and I had an amp. So what we would do, and my amp had 2 inputs in it. It was a little Fender Deluxe. And we would put both the bass and the guitar in there, and he would have his snare drum. Then we found the kid later on with a saxophone. And we did that for a little while. And then all of a sudden, everybody really started to play. And it was like, the way MySpace is right now, where, if you own a guitar, you're in a band, it was the same thing, only it was in people's basements and garages and stuff. That's where the original term garage band, I think, comes from. So all of a sudden, everybody played. So it was like you started to gravitate. What I did, when you're 13 or 14 years old, somebody who's 15 or 16 years old is a lot older than you are. It's just a growing period. So there were guys at that age playing in bands, and I would go to the high school dances back then, and I would watch them. And, the 2-year difference was huge. And I started hanging around with the guys that actually were playing real gigs and stuff like that. And that's how I really started picking up how to play songs in a band, by watching those guys.